Hello. So, on yesterday, which is the 24th of April 2020, I called into the War Room with Alex Jones's InfoWars channel of Owen Schroyer, I believe is his name. And he was discussing different things as far as, well, if you've watched InfoWars or listened, at least I usually listen. Though honestly, I didn't find the channel for a while, or the website. I'll be honest on that. I hadn't heard of, and I'm not being rude when I say this, I'm just being honest. I had not heard of Alex Jones until I think it was either 2013 or 2014. I didn't know about the InfoWars thing or anything like that until then, though realistically a lot of his stuff does make sense in so many ways. It's kind of, in certain ways it's kind of eerie in a lot of different regards, and not in a bad way. Please don't think that I'm saying that in a bad way. It's one of those, well, I've been saying some of that for a while and I didn't realize that there were so many other people who realized that. That's pretty cool. However, when I called in, and I'll be honest, I haven't checked to see how that went on the InfoWars website when speaking with Owen Schroyer, I think it's Schroyer, of the War Room, which that was a whole other ball of wax because I wound up researching the term war room. Yeah, I went down that rabbit hole. Looking up that aspect, and then found something along the lines of fail-safe, which apparently I learned before yesterday, the aspect of fail-safe being a military and law enforcement term, which there's also apparently a book and a movie. My mind goes the way it does. Point being, I had called in and it was to discuss the immunizations aspect. And what I had personally discussed had been in reference to anthrax. And I had gotten involved in multiple discussions with people over the years about various aspects of immunizations, and actually saying it is important to get immunized, so that way, I mean, immunizations has been going on for centuries. For centuries. There was a female who realized that if you took just a little bit of the illness and injected just a tiny amount, your body would develop natural immunities to that sort of problem. Obviously, science and technology has worked in regards of perfecting as best as possible the different ways to immunize. Now, I didn't discuss this portion on the war room, or in the war room, or the phone call. Nonetheless, there have been multiple different ways to attempt to make sure that the general population was kept safe, through getting the immune system accustomed to the various aspects of bacteria, because there are such things as good bacteria. And you can research that on your own. And it is true, your white blood cells will do what's necessary to fight off the infection while also increasing the health of the red blood cells. And so, in reference to what I had discussed, which was in brief of the anthrax shot series, it's a shot series for those who don't know, at least at the time when I was in medical hold back in 2000 before it became the Warrior Transition Unit. What I had briefly discussed was there were a few soldiers who were in medical hold unit before it became warrior transition unit. Again, I didn't graduate basic training. Those guys did. The majority of them also completed AIT. And so there were a few soldiers, one in particular that I remember. He had been in the medical hold unit for several years, and there were multiple surgeries that he was going through, that the bones had deteriorated in certain areas. There were muscular surgeries that he had undergone to repair some of the damage. Now, the United States government, as well as many others, know that biomedical warfare has been a thing that has gone on for a while. It shouldn't be, but that's a personal opinion. I doubt I'm the only one who thinks that. Nonetheless, that soldier had been in medical hold unit, again, before it became warrior transition unit, and I was in medical hold in 2000. That particular soldier that I'm discussing, he had been in medical hold either 3 or 6 years, getting all those surgeries. Actually, I think it was 6 years, because his prior surgery that he was still healing from had been 3 years from the time that I had shown up in medical hold. And he and I had discussed several things. One of the things that we had discussed was the unit that he watched go in had, there were no survivors from that particular immunization set. And, you know, as I listened to his experience and what he saw and what he watched, it was one of those, okay, I couldn't say anything. I just listened. I mean, how else are you going to learn from someone who's been through that sort of experience? You listen. And you keep an open mind. And, you know, you keep an open heart when they're telling you something extremely serious. And while I listened, he had discussed several other aspects from his time, because he was actually involved in Desert Storm. And so I bring up this point not just because I had called into the war room. That is a base point, in the, pun intended, right? I have gotten into multiple discussions where, yes, I understand that there are certain side effects to immunizations. I do. I understand that. I do. There are plenty of people who can tell you far more stories about their personal experiences and people they have known in person than I could. However, for those individuals that I had gotten into multiple debates in reference to immunizations, I tried explaining, for example, those who didn't want to get their children immunized for measles. Well, that was eradicated. That was eradicated. Measles was eradicated because of that immunization. And I had explained, usually to females, there were very few males I had to explain this to. The females, I told them, the science and the technology together for the regards of ensuring the general population safety, while the measles shot in that particular reference has been administered whatever age people got that, if you choose not to immunize your children, you're essentially causing problems for the elderly, because by the time your children are older and they're having, you know, whatever, you're causing issues for the older generations who they cannot get that again. They have to get a modified version, and that modified version isn't necessarily going to be as good for them because of their older, biology, and then other health issues that have essentially gone through. And you're not paying attention to the fact that there have been millions, not hundreds of people, not thousands of people, not hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people who had to go through the different aspects of each of those immunizations as they get approved to ensure the safety of that, to keep the general population safe. And while I understand not all immunizations are ideal for everybody, for example, I have noticed anytime that I get the flu shot, I actually wind up with the flu. I don't actually not get the flu. I actually get it, and it's like, no, that's backwards. For me, not for everybody. For me, I have whatever my immune system is whatever my immune system is. Everybody's is different. However, the generalized sorts of immunizations, that stuff's actually important, realistically. And so when listening to females, usually, not saying there haven't been males that I've listened to on that, but it's usually been females who I have discussed this with in regards to the first groups of people who go through those sets, 9 times out of 10 are soldiers. And then the irony and the dichotomy of the individuals who chose and choose to treat soldiers the way they have, and in a disrespectful manner. I mean, yes, there are plenty of people, thankfully there are far more people, who are genuinely respectful to those who have signed that dotted line. However, then there are those similar to the ones that I had multiple discussions with and debates with in regards to the immunizations, that they were willing, literally told me to my face, they were willing to spit on the graves of soldiers. They were willing to spit on soldiers. It's like, you best not come near me. Because that is a form of assault. I was actually asked why, and I said, that is a form of assault, and if you get punched in the face because you're dumb enough to do something like that, you technically assaulted someone. I don't recommend you doing that. You have the right to your opinion. You have the right to express your opinion. But if it wasn't for the soldiers that you want to disrespect, you wouldn't have those rights. You wouldn't have that freedom to think for yourself. You wouldn't have that freedom to express yourself. You wouldn't have your constitutional rights. And so, usually when in those discussions, it's gone extremely deep, and then the females are usually, why do you have to have so many facts? Well, I think it's better to have facts. I'm not saying that feelings aren't important. Of course feelings are important. However, while you might feel that your, feelings matter, well, your feelings matter to you. Your feelings matter to those people who agree with you. Just as you have that right because of soldiers who did what they did, because of law enforcement who keeps that balance, because you really don't want martial law. You really don't. And so the individuals, again, usually females, well, I don't care how you feel. You are speaking with the wrong individual. If you are telling me your opinion and your feelings are one thing, and, multiple times, you need to change your opinion, Susan, or you need to change your opinion, Lady Dori, Belle, depending on the area, situation, discussion. It's just one of those, give me facts for me to change my opinion. Give me experiences to change my opinion. And so in reference of the immunizations, well, I knew someone who knows someone who knows someone who knew someone who is related to someone else who had a marital something another, and then twice removed, and then something another, and then their friends, cousins, so on and so forth down the line. They got the shot, and then the next day they found out their child was autistic. My facial expression at this point in time is probably almost exact, most likely, to my response when listening to that. And it was one of those, so are you going to tell me that autism is not a genetics thing? That it just has to do with that. There's no genetics involved whatsoever. I mean, yes, there are certain things that can trigger recessive genes, and if there is something that triggers that recessive gene or set of genes, that is a different aspect. However, if in reference to you got the shot, or whoever, of that long list of however many people removed that is not you, giving me that reference, the aspects of that was and I did ask this multiple times, was that child tested for autism before getting the shot or after getting the shot? And usually I was told, well, that child was tested well before getting that shot. And so what is your point? Whatever situation, whether it was Susan, Lady, Dori, Belle, whatever, I think I've made my point. And what do you mean? So they had, okay, let me break this down for you, this math. You have some innate whatever capability to remember 17 different which ways of somebody else's kid, but you couldn't follow that simplistic timeline. You said that the child of whomever, and then they'd repeat usually that however many different things. Yeah, okay, whatever. Not that I don't care in an overall sort of way, but in that, like, whatever, I don't care. But in this regard, you told me that the timeline essentially is the child was tested how many months prior to whatever shot? And they tell me, they would either say it was, 1 month, 3 months, a year, however long the different testings were going on. And then, the next day they got the shot. And then the day after, the months or year-long process, that was when they found out about the autism. And I'd say that and repeat that to them and look at them and, wait and just, come on. You have a brain. Use it. And so they'd look at me like I was the dumb one for pointing that out. And then when they were finally capable of opening their mouth to actually formulate words instead of just, keep their mouth dropped open so long, well, I've had comments in that regard. You can reference a certain stay-at-home moms group for that, of what I said in specific. Not the only time I've used that line. I am one who was born and raised in New Jersey. So I'm really not, I've actually been so surprised as to how many people who were not offended or who were offended because of me saying, oh, well, if you're going to keep your mouth open like that, you might just have a cock fly in there, Why don't you do it? No, you're just going to keep on leaving your mouth open like that? Okay. And so, when they finally, and then not forgetting having been in the Army, I mean, I didn't graduate basic training, but anybody who's been in basic training, I mean, unless they've changed that a lot, where no drill sergeant can say a curse word, which, what, people in regular everyday life, they don't swear? There's nobody who's ever used a curse word at any point in time when speaking. I mean, I cannot be the only person who has said quite a few. Probably at minimum once an hour when I can't be the only one. Cannot. Anyway, when they finally were able to speak and formulate a word, it was usually something along the lines of, again, why do you have to use facts? Or why don't you just change your opinion on my feelings? And why don't you care about my feelings? Why do you care about all those people that you referenced in comparison to the one that I'm bringing up? And it's like, because all of those people that went through those immunizations, you are basically saying that it doesn't matter, that they went through what they went through, and you're not caring about the research that it took for those immunizations. Irony of you being so into science and facts. Except for right now, when it comes to your feelings, then when you have your feelings, your science and facts mean nothing to you, which, talk about a flip-flop there. Just saying, I'm not able to understand how you can look me in my eyes, stand in front of me face to face, and attempt to tell me that because of one individual that got autism after however long of testing, but one shot and the day afterwards magically that's the cause. How short is your attention span? Does a fruit fly have a longer attention span than you do if you could not look at that, what I laid out just in front of you very simply? Has a fruit, and they only live like 2 or 3 weeks. So, if you're telling me that your attention span is less than that of a fruit fly, I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said about that. You might want to do some self-evaluation on that before you go and say anything else about all that other stuff you want to complain to me about. And I've dealt with quite a few complaints. And while I very much I very much have done the best I could to not let that sort of stuff like annoy me or affect me, then there are those that I've dealt with over the years who have repeatedly come at me, and it's just one of those, all you do is complain. Like, do you ever have anything positive to say? Do you have anything good to say? Do you have anything that is actually worth my time? No? Okay. And then when I've said that, oh, you're so rude, you are so snobby. Sure. How many times have you come at me with this exact same thing? How many times? How many times? And then they usually would tell me the amount of times, but they could not tell me, how that made sense of the reference point of the months and years, and then like the shot the next day and so on. And so it couldn't tell me the connection points there, but could tell me all sorts of, and it's like, oh, okay. So you actually keep a tally of how many times you have come at me? When are you gonna actually think about stuff that's more important and more beneficial? Just wondering. But going back to the aspects of the anthrax shot, It's one of those. That has been something that multiple soldiers, not one or two, not one or two units, not one or two squads, which is actually less than units, by the way, not one or two platoons, which is more than squads but less than units, not one or two brigades, not even one or two bases of totality for soldiers that have gone through that sort of stuff. And so, you know, again, be more respectful and genuinely so, not in a half-ass sort of way, not in a, oh, it's obligatory. No, no, no. Genuinely be grateful. Genuinely be thankful for them. I mean, there is not a I again cannot tell a lie. So anytime I have said thank you for your service, whether in writing, text, typing, whatever, or verbally, or even non-verbally because of the way I am, it's one of those, because I do pray all the time, and so I am the way I am. But I genuinely mean that. I don't say it just to say it. I don't say it to sound cool. Ironically, the amount of times that I have gotten dirty looks because I have said it to someone actually outweighs the amount of times that someone has been like, yeah, I agree with her. Thanks for your service. I mean, literally, because the majority of times when I have said thank you for your service in person more so than in other regards, I have had people come at me in those different locations. Why are you saying thank you for that person's service to the military? And then I have to defend. And it's like, really? Really? And depending on the situation, depends on how that particular situation occurred and went usually downhill for the other individual. Usually very quickly. Very, very quickly. I just ridiculously. And so, you know, in regards to both immunizations and, of course, the reference of soldiers, those guys have had to go through that. But they're not the only ones, by the way. I mean, in order to work in various government locations, you have to have immunizations. You don't have that same sort of choice as you do in the civilian sector. When you go to basic training for the Army or the Air Force or the Coast Guard or the Marine Corps or the Navy or now the Space Force or whatever other branch, you have to go through several immunizations. When you work for a federal agency, I would guesstimate it's the exact same way. I would also guesstimate if you work in the House of Senate or the House of Congress, I would guesstimate you probably have to do that too. Because of stuff. I would also guesstimate, you know, the different branches of the different law enforcement guys and fire department guys. Probably have to get certain immunizations or provide a shot record in that regard. And so, you know, but it does start when it comes to the soldiers. I mean, with those who understand scientific research, what is the easiest way to control a situation and monitor the health in case there is an emergency? It's called a military base, right? But like in an overall look, when you think about things, is it easier to herd cats when it comes to the civilian sector and make sure that they show up to appointments? Or is it easier, okay, everybody show up at formation at this time, on this day, da-da-da-da, and we're going to go do this. For the safety and da-da-da-da. The latter of the two. And then the doctors are able to check their vitals, make sure they're okay, ask about symptoms, so on and so forth. So that way, later on, the irony of those 17, 18, 19, 20 different ways down the line, it is safer. They are able to fix certain things, take away certain side effects through the molecular compounds of the different whatever injections to ensure the safety. And so I've never understood people who, oh, I refuse to get it. No, why? Why would you do that? You are not only undoing all of the immunizations and antibodies that have been, making the general population stronger, but you're also negating all of those individual soldiers throughout however long who had gone through that. You are negating all of, if you don't want to be respectful to soldiers, what about the civilians who signed up for the general public trials? You're negating those. If you don't care about the soldiers, but you care about other civilians, then why are you negating their contributions? And realistically, yes, everyone at some point dies. And that can be in the literal sense, but it could also be in the figurative sense. Because everybody goes through transformation in their life. When people and I'm going to go in this regard of military, of course, but when an individual chooses to sign the dotted line or realistically go and speak with a recruiter, a portion of who they once were dies in a figurative sense. When they actually, and they grow into another aspect of themselves. When they actually go forward and sign the dotted line, a portion of their prior existence dies. It doesn't mean it goes away. It doesn't mean that they necessarily forget it. It doesn't mean that they care any less. It does mean that a portion stops. So for example, I joined when I was 17 years old. My son did the same thing. My son wanted to join. The only difference is he didn't have to fight me as I had to fight my biological family. So, where he didn't have to fight for me to be like, okay, I prefer you do certain things, but if you want to go this route, I know you're intelligent. I know you're smart. I want to be there when you graduate. I care about you. I love you. I support your choice. I didn't have that. So he knows that no matter what, I care. I didn't have that. And I know that there are others who didn't have that. But nonetheless, there's two examples of a portion stopping. Doesn't mean that I'm dead, obviously. Hopefully my son is okay. I haven't spoken with him in a while. But in that regard, obviously I'm not his mom. I'm still his mom. Just like my biological family is still my biological family. And in certain regards, their lack of concern and lack of care, that did not change. But in that same instance, my concern and my care for my son and my daughter as well never stopped. It will always be. That is just how I am a mom who genuinely cares. I'm not just an egg donor. In regards to certain. Anyway, but then, when it goes to basic training, when you actually take that oath, a portion of you that you once were stops. It's no longer high school. It's no longer whatever. For me, I admit, I said that oath in private a lot longer before I was in high school. in all honesty, I said that oath when I was in New Jersey, when I first started researching military stuff. And that is before the 93 attack, mind you. I said that oath before that because I was already researching certain things because I already had had a dream that I had had. And so I already had said that back in, I think it was 1991 or 1992 was the first time I said that oath. So in that regard of actually saying that oath, whatever time frame you say it, portion of you is no longer existence. You still are you, but you have grown and taken that next step forward. When you go and are transported over to the military base for basic training, that is a physical representation of that portion not being a continuous thing in that regard in certain ways. When you get off of the bus after however you get to whatever base, that is another physical representation. When you actually finish 0 week and you go through all that before you go over to actual basic training, there is another portion where it's like, all right, you took a step forward, you have gone this far, so on and so forth. When, for example, when you are issued your actual uniform, that is a transition right there. When you actually go over to wherever you go for your basic training after 0 week, which, by the way, 0 week doesn't necessarily mean less than a couple of days. 0 week can mean weeks, it can mean months, it depends. Then when you actually get into basic training, then it hits the fan and you very much realize if you weren't prepared beforehand for certain aspects. Now, again, I have not graduated basic training because I had the head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 during my basic training. But for those who actually graduate basic training, they go through that ceremony. For some people, they call it pomp and circumstance. No, it's actually a celebration for what they have actually achieved. All that time, that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for however many weeks of their basic training. That is a pinnacle portion where they have taken that full transformation in full to become whatever individual piece of that individual branch for the overall United States of America's armed forces. Then they go and whether they go back for the 30 days between basic training to wherever they signed up from to go then to AIT or whatever it's called for each branch. AOC apparently for the Navy. I don't know what the other terms are. Not being disrespectful, but for that example. To actual their job training. Then that's another phase where they no longer have that babysitting thing going on at all hours of the day. They still kind of have certain aspects where they're kind of, and it's not the correct term, babysitting, but those who have dealt with drill sergeants understand what I mean. You're being babysat, and you're an adult. Yes, you're an adult biologically, or you're old enough to have signed that dotted line. You still have a babysitter. That's how that goes. You like your babysitter when you were a kid, right? I mean, the majority of my babysitters I liked. There were some that I didn't like. I'm sure there are plenty of people who could say there were some drill sergeants that they did not like, and then there were some drill sergeants they really liked, even if you were getting in trouble at times. It is what it is. So then, you go through, and again, I didn't graduate basic training, which means I didn't graduate AIT, but I understand the process. I know that there are others who do understand and comprehend that process. So, again, with that sort of transition, each week of your AIT or each section of that time, you have the different graduation points, those miniature milestones. And certain aspects of you just isn't, it's not that it's gone, it's not that you forgot it, it's just at that point in time, it's not what is necessary. And then you get to your graduation point and you're able to go to your first duty station for your first job assignment. And so, you know, again, in those times, you get different immunizations. Because depending where you're at and where you go to, depends on what you need to make sure that you are safe. So I did hear, after getting off of the phone in regards with the War Room Owen Schroeder from InfoWars, the Alex Jones thing, in regards to what was it? The aspects of there was a point that I was going to that that it had been known for many years. There have been many articles in regards to in reference to the anthrax shots. I mean, at that regard, going back to the medical hold thing, that was back then. Now, there was a person who went and spoke before I had spoken, a different caller, one of the males who had gone on, and he had said something about when returning back to the United States of America after being deployed. Well, I'm sure that the air quality being different, not being around certain fumes from certain types of and I'm not trying to think of the politically correct way to say this. I'm not. I'm trying to get the words that I can actually say and not have to worry about not having my video posted. There are certain, I would guesstimate, there are certain altitudes, that is an example, in comparison to the altitude in regards to sea level changes for certain locations. As an example, as to certain physical feelings, irony, irony on that, but however, the acclimation of getting back into the United States of America compared to what is in whatever vicinity they were stationed in, and so, or at. And so I would guesstimate that during debriefings, there might have been certain questions that were asked, and the individuals in the military were able to be like, all right, so we got to look at this to figure a way that will assist the transition back to the United States of America from wherever they were stationed. And, you know, there are ways to assist that. I mean, what is it? The over-the-counter stuff, if you really look at over-the-counter stuff, how many individuals did that go through before that could be over-the-counter use? Which is something that I do not understand when it comes to the people who are into the anti-immunizations thing. They are so willing to use over-the-counter stuff, whether it's in a homeopathy sort of way, like that hasn't been tested for hundreds of thousands of years. Please. Please. Just saying. However, but even something like aspirin. I mean, and realistically, aspirin is a portion of a willow tree that the Native Americans would rip the bark off of the willow tree or rip a branch off and chew on it because of the medicinal properties that assisted with certain pain. And so, you can get, I mean, yeah, you can go to a willow tree and do that. if it's a necessity. But if you can keep a bottle of aspirin on you, you don't have to chew on that willow tree nearly as long, I would guesstimate. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how long you have to chew on the willow tree to get that, but in that regard. But yeah, that's over the counter, and Native Americans have known that for a lot longer than the United States of America has been called the United States of America. And there are other homeopathy sorts of ways that have assisted health and healing. It's just that certain properties of those individual, if you look at vitamins, they know, the scientists know that vitamins are helpful and stuff like that, and they know generalized things that they assist with in a lot of ways, but then there are certain things that have certain concentrations that are far more assistive, and other ways that they haven't fully gotten around to those scientific measures of, okay, well, why? And they have some idea, but then they have other points where it's like, okay, well, why specifically this? Why? What? And so, again, I've not been able to understand the people who, I'm not going to do any form of the immunizations, but this homeopathy stuff. This stuff that it's known, but it's not known, but it's known, but it's not known, but it's known. I'm gonna go with that. And then there are benefits to it. There's no denying that. If you know your own body well enough, if you know your own stuff well enough of yourself. But if you're just going to go in there and be like, well, I just randomly... I'm sure there are plenty of cases where there have been problems after some of that. I mean, if you want to be your own guinea pig, I guess, but then, you have to go to a hospital sometime, right? And if you think about that and you haven't gotten your immunizations, you're going to the people who have immunizations, telling them that I've not been able to understand that one either, how that dichotomy goes, because it's just one of those, so you don't get immunizations because of your issues with scientific medicine, but you're going to go to a hospital when you need it. It's kind of like the equivalent of people who will say mean things to and about law enforcement guys, but the second there's a problem, who are they calling? They're calling law enforcement guys. Just saying. That has never made sense to me. I mean, I understand that there are a few bad ones here and there are some that have made mistakes and they can redeem themselves and stuff like that. However, can't blame all of law enforcement, just like there are a few soldiers that have made some bad choices. There's no denying that, but you can't blame all soldiers for that. Just saying. Personal opinion. That's how I feel. Then again, there's facts that back up how I feel. Anyway, you guys have a good one. And look through the information tab thingamabob for that. you guys, yeah, take care.